Good afternoon, everyone. It's WhiskyCast, WebCast Wednesday, and we have a full slate of guests lined up for our webcast today. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studios here in New Jersey, and we'll bring in our guests in just a second for you. Just a little bit of news to talk about. We do have one or a couple of event notifications that came in today that we can update you on. Whisky Live Tel Aviv, which was sort of the next major event, at least as far as whiskey festivals go, that had not been affected on the calendar. It was scheduled for May 13th and 14th. We now have word from the organizers. It will not be held until sometime in September. The dates for that are yet to be announced. Also, the American Distilling Institute, ADI, has canceled its conference that was rescheduled for mid-July in New Orleans. City officials there have basically said they would like all major events and conventions canceled for the rest of the year. Bill Owens at ADI confirmed to us today that the plans are to hold a virtual conference and trade show. And we also got word since our last webcast that we got word Monday, Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans will also not be held this year in person. There will be virtual seminars in place. Plans for that will be announced later on. I'll be talking with Caroline Rosen of the Tales of the Cocktail Foundation on our upcoming episode of WhiskyCast this weekend, and we'll get some of those details. Let's bring in our panel now just to introduce everybody. And while this order may change from time to time during the hour, next to me on the top row, Andy Watts joining us from Wellington, South Africa. He is in charge of Intrinsic Whiskey Excellence for Distell, which includes the James Sedgwick Distillery in Wellington, just outside of Cape Town, along with the Distell facilities in Scotland. That's Bunnahabhain, Tobermory, and Deanston. Next to him, the one and only Alan Winchester, the master distiller for the Glenlivet. Right below Alan in our Brady Bunch lineup here, Matt Hofmann, the master distiller from Westland Distillery. In the middle, on the bottom row, Bernard Walsh, the founder of Walsh Whiskey Company in Ireland. And in the lower corner below me, the one and only Adam Hannett of Bruichladdich Distillery. We will be taking your whiskey questions and comments, and they're already starting to come in the chat room. Feel free to ask them. We will pose them to our audience right now, to our panel over the next hour or so. And we'll also give them a chance to talk about what's going on at their distilleries. Adam, I want to bring you in first on this one and tell us basically what is happening at Bruichladdich right now. We know there will not be an Islay festival in a month or so, but what else is happening on the island right now?
Well, first of all, Mark, thanks very much for having us this evening or this afternoon or whatever it may be. It's my bedtime, so I'm going to stick with this evening. So yeah, on Islay, obviously at Bruichladdich, we're shut down. We took the decision quite early to shut down while it was kind of still within our control. We have about between 80 and 90 people, depending on what's going on at the distillery at any one time. So with quite a lot of people in one place, we were we just had to kind of think of everyone's safety. So we shut down pretty early. Where we can work from home, we will, or we are. But really, so we stopped towards the end of March, I think the 20th of March, and there's only really been myself or Alan, the production director, excuse me, come down to the distillery just to do security checks, kind of once a day, just to check out the place, make sure everything's okay. Yeah, like you say, the festival is cancelled. We're actually having a conversation just now about what we do. I mean, that we can do this. We can have chats on the internet, kind of live. So we'll do something similar for the festival day in May. So we're working on something. We want to mark the occasion. It's always a big day for us in the whiskey year. So we'll definitely do something. I think there's some quite ambitious plans. We'll see if we can pull them all off, but it'll be good fun. It usually is. For the rest of the island, it's we're quite vulnerable where we are. So with the transport links, the ferry, the plane as well, are kind of lifeline services. So we're quite remote. We're feeling it just now. We feel pretty cut off. But I think pretty much all the distilleries now have stopped production as well. So it's pretty quiet. But we've had a lovely spell of weather. So the gardens on Islay are looking fantastic just now. All the potatoes are in. So all the important things are getting done. So yeah, we're doing okay. We're doing okay.
Good to hear. And we do have a question for you already from Dave Kuhn in Atlanta. He wants to hear you tease us with this year's would-be Faygiel bottle. What did you guys have planned, and what are you going to do with it?
Well, I think we're still talking about it, but having some conversations today, actually. So we had a couple of options, we're going to release a couple of bottles. I won't give you too much information as to what they are, because we'll release them when we can, and they're quite interesting things. The only maybe the clue, if you want a tease, is that one of the whiskies I made up, I had created this at the whiskey masterclass a few years ago, on the festival day. So the masterclass that Jim used to do, that I now do, I created something there, and all the whiskies that I create for the masterclass, they are just for the masterclass, really, just for those people who are in the room. But there was one that it was pretty good, so I thought, well, let's go with it. Let's keep going. So we may well do something with that in the near future. We may leave it till next year. So we have some other options up our sleeve that we've previously or have bottled. We haven't released yet, so we may well look to do something like that. But nothing confirmed at the moment.
Andy, I want to bring you into the discussion right now, because you're dealing with probably as restrictive a situation in South Africa as anybody in the world, maybe outside of Pennsylvania right now, when it comes to liquor. Tell us what's going on in South Africa and the restrictions that you're under as far as even moving product around.
Yeah, well, I think pretty much, Mark, like Adam has just told us there, that our distilleries are shut down. Alcohol production is not seen as essential. So the distilleries, all wineries, etc., everybody's closed down. The other thing in South Africa, which makes us slightly different to the majority, or just about basically the rest of the world, is that we have not been allowed alcohol sales. So there's no production. We're not allowed to sell any liquor. And there's also no transporting of liquor allowed. So even the export of our wines cannot take place, and neither can any spirits. So it's if you think the last bottle of anything we sold was the 26th of March. So it's quite a hectic, hard shutdown for us. And at the moment and rightly so, there is no light at the end of our tunnel yet.
We also have folks joining us from South Africa. Mark Pendlebury, I'm sure you know Mark, says hello and hopes everyone is keeping well and safe. People wonder, I think it was Gordon Homer or somebody has suggested that you have the most epic whiskey title ever in the business as head of Intrinsic Whiskey Excellence. I know that basically you're in charge of the whiskey products that come out of both James and all the distilleries in Scotland. How did you get that title?
I think, Mark, we've got to ask HR that question. In 2016, Distell set up this Centre of Excellence, and I got put onto the whiskey side, and I think HR just played around with the words. At the end of the day, it really means I've got whiskey reporting to me now, and not people. For 25 years, I managed the distillery, which is a 24/7 operation. And now it's looking after the whiskies, predominantly in South Africa. I mean, we've got an amazing team in Scotland, so my input there is basically to get samples from them and taste them and say well done and keep going. Stephen and Julianne are really looking after our blending and cask selection over there. So I don't get that involved on that side, but yeah, the title comes from creative HR people.
Okay, let's bring Bernard in from Walsh Whiskey in Ireland. Bernard, your country is under a complete lockdown, at least for a few more weeks here. Tell us what things have been like for you and your team at Walsh Whiskey.
Mark, as Adam was saying earlier, it's very, very similar to a lot of our neighbouring countries, the UK and so forth. We're on lockdown, I think, well before our British friends. But fortunately for myself and the business here, we're seen as an essential service, food and drink. So many, and if not most, of the distilleries are still in operation. Obviously, we'd have seen here and in Scotland and in the US and South Africa. Well, not South Africa, but countries, Canada, where distilleries are in operation, contributing to the efforts, the emergency with alcohol for hand sanitization and so forth. So that's very much a big play here. Interestingly, from our business point of view, we are, orders are still coming in. They're smaller. Shipment, production, and bottling is happening. Smaller runs, smaller batches. So there is a lot of contraction in the business. The everyday life here is I suppose, similar to what you're experiencing in much of the US. Our families are in lockdown at home. They've got a 2K boundary where they can exercise and get out. You're allowed to obviously get to the pharmacist. You're allowed to the shops, the retail. When I say the shops, I mean the grocery shops. So the off trade for us is still a viable business. Of course, the on trade here, bar, restaurant, all shut down, similar to our neighbours in the UK and a lot of the US, of course. We really interestingly, in March, we have seen in the US, we don't have the depletions data yet for the US. It normally takes about 30 days. End of this month, we'll get that. But our billings data from, let's say, our importer to or the distribution network is up 30% month to month to the end of March. And anecdotally, what we're hearing up to Easter as well, it's still very, very positive. We are maybe different to most in that the majority of our business is in off trade, so benefiting hugely from that.
All right, thank you, Bernard. Let's bring in Matt now. Matt, Seattle was one of the early hotspots in North America for the COVID-19 virus, and you guys had to pretty much shut down. I know that Adam and I were out there in February for the World Whiskey Forum, and I was scared for probably a couple of weeks after that, worried that I was going to get an email from you guys saying that somebody there had been exposed. And fortunately, that never happened. But how nervous were you guys when all this came down?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty surreal knowing how quickly things evolved, especially since we had hosted this big gathering of people from all over the world. And then this kind of idea had come out that it had been circulating in the Seattle area since January. So as far as we know, nobody who attended brought anything in or got sick or anything. So we're quite fortunate in that. But yeah, we were asking the question, like, is this happening? And this is something we're going to have to deal with. And luckily, it didn't impact the World Whiskey Forum at all.
And you switched all your production over to hand sanitizer pretty much from the beginning. How is that going for you guys? And when do you think you might get back to making whiskey again?
Yeah, we had switched our production to hand sanitizer initially because we knew that we could do something for the community, and there's definitely a good spirit here of being community based, even for a city the size of Seattle, to be able to kind of throw yourselves into something that will make a difference. And what we realized was, it's not that we can make sanitizer and donate it and give it out to people. It's that nurses and doctors don't have hand sanitizer. It's gone and has been gone for months. And that really changed the perspective for us. That changed the perspective from going, here's a thing that we can do to help the community, to, frankly, we have a moral obligation to help the community, in my opinion. As you noted, Mark, Seattle was one of the first epicenters. So the depletions of things like PPE and sanitizer went pretty quick here. So we are still at full tilt. We are producing nothing but hand sanitizer. In order for us to do that in the safest way, I mean, obviously the safety of our own team comes first and foremost. We're operating about 50% production, but we're putting out, between 50 and 100 gallons of hand sanitizer, bottled, packaged every day. All of it has gone to hospitals. We have a waiting list that's more than 100 organizations long. So it's pretty extraordinary. I mean, it's really something actually to see the response from people who are trying to, these people are just trying to get their frontline healthcare workers the stuff that they need. It's not even just for the coronavirus response. It's also for people who are running cancer research institutions and, neonatal, care clinics and stuff like that. The hand sanitizer shortage affects everyone. So we're going to keep going on this for, it's hard to say, I think probably at least through the end of May. And really, I think we'll try to keep doing something until the healthcare workers can get what they need.
Are you able to get the raw materials you need? Because it's not just a case of getting the grain to make the alcohol, but also getting the aloe and the stuff that's used for denaturing that I know is in short supply. I've seen other distillers say that they're going to have to stop making sanitizer because they can't get access to the stuff they need.
Yeah, so what we're doing and what a lot of other distillers are doing, and actually, right now is a great time to actually point to the distilled spirits industry in the US holistically, because I've been on calls with companies, from the biggest companies to the smallest companies, biggest facilities to the smallest facilities, who are all trying to chip in on this effort to do something and make something. The ethanol is the thing we can make. The stuff that we need is stuff made according to this formula provided by the World Health Organization. So that's glycerin, that's hydrogen peroxide. So it's designed to be made anywhere. But in the US, we also have to add a denaturant, which basically makes the alcohol-based sanitizer taste really unpleasant, as if the hydrogen peroxide wasn't going to do that on its own. So that is in short supply, as is the glycerin and the hydrogen peroxide. But the denaturant, throws a lot of challenges into the mix. That if it's designed to be super, super bitter, you can't run that on a normal bottling line because it'll stick around and stuff like that. So that's been a challenge. It's been a bit crazy. It's been a bit of the Wild West in terms of sourcing raw ingredients. But the other thing that you see out of this is that people are coming together. There's been a great response in working with hospitals. Hospitals have been able to source some of the raw ingredients, especially the hydrogen peroxide, when our source dried up. We've seen people donating supplies, donating grain, donating bottles. So everybody's kind of pitching in, actually. It kind of gives you some real hope for humanity, actually, out of all of this.
Great. Alan, I want to bring you into this because you and I just saw each other a month ago at Dramfest in Christchurch. And I know I was nervous flying back because it turns out somebody on my flight was actually positive for coronavirus within a couple of weeks after that flight. How worried were you that weekend? Because we never really got a chance to talk about it. But I will admit I was nervous that weekend at Dramfest with over 1,000 people at the town hall on Saturday and Sunday, and then making that long flight back from New Zealand to the States, you going all the way back to Scotland. How nervous were you?
Yeah, it's right. It's amazing. It was a different era than meeting lots of folk in New Zealand. My first trip to New Zealand. Fascinated. I listened to your cast the other week there, Mark, how vibrant a scene the distilling is in New Zealand. Also to meet folk, Michael Fraser Milne, who and I went to school, the same school. We shared a bottle. I first gave him 20 years ago, and it was a sort of surreal occasion. We were aware of it. I continued on to Australia, but after in Australia, when Tom Hanks was declared as having the virus, it was decided that I should go home. Yeah, so worried. I don't think the full implication comes back until you're home and you see what's happening. I have 3 of the close family in the National Health Service, which I feel for them, but they are now confident they've got the PPE and etc. to keep going. So there's good news, but when you hear some of the tragic cases, your heart goes out. And I hear the community of distillers is very much reflected in our communities in Speyside. It's a bit of we're in this together. How's it going? It's very quiet here. We were due to go to the Speyside Whisky Festival. We've got beautiful weather, something very rare for this part, but it's been beautiful dry weather. So yeah, but apart from that, I got home safely. Mark, I think I was luckier than Dave Broom. I think he just got home this week. Yes.
Yeah, Dave just got home this weekend because he went to Australia as well for a premiere of the Amber Light, and somebody at that premiere came down positive, and he was told to quarantine, and he and his family wound up back in New Zealand for an extra couple of weeks. And Dave told me that they got out on one of the last flights they could before New Zealand closed the borders. Dave will be joining us on our Friday night webcast from the UK as well when we have our Writers Roundtable. So we'll talk to him more about that. Alan, we talked with Adam about the Phage not happening this year. Give me a sense of what it means to you guys to not have the Spirit of Speyside Festival.
Well, Spirit of Speyside has evolved into, like many of the festivals, into a big occasion. We welcome folk back, which is always a great sign. The original concept of the festival was to open up distilleries that weren't really on the trail, and also to meet the makers sort of thing, and it was visitors into Speyside. It's been very, very successful to the extent I don't remember, there'll be 500-600 events spread out through Speyside. We welcome lots of folk back, so it's eerily quiet in Tufton, I can tell you. When I go out for my exercise, it's a very quiet place. You do see one or two folk about, but everybody's living to it. So yeah, it's quite surreal in a sense, as I've said, to see the place so quiet.
We have getting a lot of questions, a lot of comments from our folks in the chat room now. And one of the early ones that came in right about the time we started, and I'm trying to scroll back up here to find it, but they wanted to talk about sustainability. And James Sedgwick Distillery won the Icons of Whisky Award for the most sustainable distillery in the world during the Icons of Whisky Awards last month. Matt, I know that you and Adam have both been involved with sustainability projects with your distilleries within Remy Cointreau, and we discussed it during the World Whiskey Forum. I know all of you have been involved in this to a certain extent. How can we define sustainability in the industry when it comes to distilleries? What do we need to be doing that we are not doing now? And I'll throw this open to whoever wants to jump in.
Sure. Mark, yeah, I'll kick it off. Obviously there's quite a few things which we did which led to the award. But, in a country like South Africa where we are, we pretty much water strapped. We've got big water shortages. In the Cape, we had terrible droughts and still have in some parts. So that was probably our main focus. And through having an anaerobic digestion system, which first takes the wastewater, and obviously a byproduct of that is methane gas. But then instead of taking that wastewater and sending it to the municipality where it would get treated further aerobically, we then put it through our own aerobic system and then through a reverse osmosis plant, which we installed. And, we're recovering now around about between 50 and 65% of our water, which then goes back into processed water, for example, like boiler water. Every kilogram of steam is a liter of water. So, a big focus for us was how can we sustain our water source here in the Cape and use it more efficiently and effectively.
What about on Islay, Adam?
Well, sustainability is such a huge kind of area. I mean, it weaves its way into every kind of aspect of everything we do. I mean, it's something we take very, very seriously on, and at Remy Cointreau, I'm sure Matt, we similar kind of stories and focus at Westland. But I think be involved. The water is one big thing. I mean, we always think we're blessed with plentiful supplies of water in Islay. We often joke if we didn't make whiskey here, we'd drown in the water. It's so wet. But it's actually, at a time like this, it's not had rain we haven't had rain for a while. So I'm actually, as I'm at the distillery just now, just so I can get a good Wi-Fi connection. So coming into the distillery just before, just looking at the burn on the way past, there's just barely a trickle coming down the hill just now. So we also have to think about distilling and the water that we have at various times of the year, because of the kind of the barley exploration we do, being so closely kind of surrounded by the growers, the farmers around us here. Looking as we started that project, I think it was 2004, the first kind of local guy grew for us. And at that time, it was a wonderful thing, and the project is getting bigger and bigger, and there's more and more barley growing, and as you learn more about it and become more involved in it, we think about the agricultural practices, we think about all the things that go on around it, and the more you kind of find out, the more you realise that actually there's a huge responsibility for us to do the right things and kind of lead by example. And so sustainability, and it's as I say, it's such a wide-ranging subject, but we want to be this distillery's been here since 1881, and we want to be here for another kind of 120, 30, 40, 50, etc. We want to be here for the long haul, so we need to look after what we do to be able to sustain that.
I know that you guys are working on a lot of the projects to make the distillery running more on in wind power, possibly wave power, things like that. I talked to Douglas about that, and it seems like Islay would be a perfect place for it. And I'm wondering, how would that work in Seattle? I know you've got a lot of wind, a lot of waves there, Matt. Any ideas what you guys can do in an urban environment with your distillery?
Yeah, the main thing when it comes to energy consumption is we have very clean green energy here. The city of Seattle is 100% renewable energy. Almost all of our electricity in the greater Puget Sound area, which is the Seattle metropolitan area, is done with hydropower. There's been a lot of wind power development. If you're not familiar with the Seattle area or the Pacific Northwest, it is a pretty big area when it comes to sustainability in the U.S. So it's not something we have to force as an issue. Honestly, we're keeping tabs on the project that Adam's talking about, over at Bruichladdich, because the biggest single thing that we could do in the future to lower our carbon footprint would be to move our boiler to an electric boiler rather than a natural gas system that we've got powered right now. So that's a really interesting point of contention from the distillery itself, but obviously our sustainability program goes well beyond the actual walls of the distillery.
Alan, we have a question from Ben Marnock, and I want to bring you in on this one. Do the guys have different water sources for distilling and cooling? I know you take the water from Josie's well for your stills, but how do you handle the water sources for cooling compared to what you use for actual distilling?
Yeah, within Chivas Brothers, there's various sources. We call processed water that goes into the actual whiskey making. We have cooling water supplies. We recycle cooling water supplies. Speaking about the sustainability, a lot of the work done in the Chivas distilleries in the last few years was in the reducing water usage, which of course means reduced effluent discharges, but also to save energy. And that's been a holy grail in distillers all through the years. And back to the sustainability question, we have been here distilling whiskey in Scotland recorded for over 500 years. We look after our environments, pristine environment, which is essential to us. So yeah, we use Glenlivet, Josie's, Blairfindie Springs are the processed water. Josie's a touch of hardness about it, which we think that's one of the secret ingredients at Glenlivet. But we also use water from the River Livet, which we return we use it, just borrow it for cooling. At Dalmunic Distillery, we take water out of the Spey for cooling, but we still use, we have still connections to the Ballantoon Burn, and we actually have boreholes just now. But very much varied, but that's one of the things we've done a lot of work on, is how much water it is to make to make a litre of whiskey. That's some of the productions, the work that we do. But we've done lots of work on the heating of the stills in the sense of recycling the steam back into the process. Aberlour did this way back in the 1980s, where we introduced thermal compression just after Bowmore, and then we used it, and that's quite prevalent within our distilleries now to recover, because Andy just mentioned it. It's the simple one: a kilo of steam is a kilo of water. If you're saving steam, you're saving water. Yeah. But remember, the quality is always very important, what you can make. So it's been a long journey along that of getting approval to make whiskey and ensure the flavours are still there.
Bernard, I want to bring you into this because you're a former chairman of the Irish Whisky Association, and I know that distilleries all over Ireland and whiskey makers have been working with the government to try to increase the sustainability and minimize the environmental impact. Give us a sense of what's happening on the Irish side.
Yeah, Mark. The Irish Whisky Association, I think, well, in Scotland with the Scottish Whisky Association, you've been spoiled probably for a long time, guys, but our association only got together in 2014. But as we've really come up the curve very quickly, and we've got, I suppose, been quite successful with our lobbying with local and national government. And when, I suppose, we started back in 2014, there was only a handful of distilleries in the country. So first of all, it was, I suppose, to get the government to see the potential of the industry and how it was such a natural fit for Ireland. We can go back 100, 200 years and we see how important Irish whiskey and the distilling business was, how important it was to farmers, the barley producers. We lost all that. So there was a whole reselling had to be done, and the Whisky Association, and now it's the Drinks Ireland, very, very important in, if you like, the reselling of that, working with the Ministry for Agriculture, ensuring that we had the crops, the barley. It's interesting listening to Adam, and I know in Bruichladdich they've sort of been leading the way with the if you like, barley grown locally on Islay and used at their distillery. In Ireland, I suppose we've had to fight that case. Let's stop importing. Ireland is absolutely made for growing barley, not just for feed barley, but of a quality and of a variety that would suit distilling, and not just one variety, but exploring some of the old variants in the past. And one of the ex-Bruichladdich boys is here in Ireland, in Waterford, and he's doing tremendous work with farmers locally down in his area, sourcing farm to barrel to bottle products. So really, really interesting work going on there. The government have been hugely supportive of the industry. I think we have got their attention. We've gone from 3 distilleries when I started to, which is 20 years ago, but even 10 years ago, there was still only 3 distilleries on the island, to over 30 distilleries now. And the government haven't been found wanting in supporting the industry.
We have a good question now from some whiskey bloke on Twitter who wants to know, do any of you see a lack of grain when things get back to normal? Will we see a delayed or even a missed harvest this year? Any thoughts on that? When we'll open this up to any of you.
That's Mark. That's something that I can speak to a little bit. It's interesting when we've been hearing about distilleries not being deemed essential. One of the reasons why distilleries have been deemed essential in the U.S. and in most states, anyways, is precisely because of that link to agriculture. If you are using any agricultural good, you can't just stop it, without wasting that crop. and importantly, impacting the next crop. So, for example, in this area, barley is not just grown for its value in terms of what we can use for whiskey and for beer, of course, but it's also really important as a rotation crop. You need that barley in the ground to bring a lot of carbon back into the soil for the potatoes or the other kind of specialty crops they grow. So you can't stop that. So at least here, one of the big things is to make sure that the agricultural system doesn't come to a screeching halt, because it would impact the food chain way beyond just stopping barley production.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I was going to jump in a little bit from the Islay perspective, because again, we're working with around about 20 farmers locally who are growing for us, and again, being out on the edge of the west coast here, things are sometimes quite precarious, and so we obviously want to support the farmers and encouraging them to continue growing. A lot of them are ploughing and getting seed in the ground at the moment while the weather's good. So at the moment, we don't know when we're going to distill. We actually have about 1,000 tons of barley grown last year still in the drying facility on the island and down at Octafad. And at the moment, with the restricted ferries, there's one ferry at the moment. We're not moving any barley, so the malting logistics start to come into play here. But some of the conversations we've been having are, we'll move heaven and earth to make sure that we, move heaven and earth. We'll move a few thousand casks, to create space in the warehouse to keep barley if we have to do that. If we get to that point. But we want to support again the local community, the local guys here. We can't just kind of, like Matt says, you can't drop in and out as and when you feel like it. You've got to stick by these guys who've been sticking by you. So we're making a lot of plans. We don't know what's going to happen, but we still need that barley. We still want that barley. We're still committed to growing and distilling from Islay grown whiskey, Islay grown barley. Sorry.
Andy, with the seasons reversed down in South Africa, you guys should be getting close to harvest time, I would assume, for your crop this year, right?
Yeah, well, our barley, actually, we get our barley from commercial maltsters in the UK. The barley in South Africa is predominantly for food and beer. We are the only commercial whiskey distillery on the continent, so nobody really takes us seriously when it comes to planting barley. The only maltster in South Africa is also malting for beer and not for spirit production. We use a commercial maltster. In terms of the grain production, we use South African yellow maize. Again, in the total picture, our 8, 9, 10,000 tons a year is absolutely nothing. So we're pretty okay. Anyone
else want to throw on this one before I go into the next question?
Yeah, well, in our sense, in the northeast of Scotland, we grow a lot of barley, and it's predominantly for distilling purposes around here. There is feed barley, but back to your sustainability question, the industry has been investing in the Hannett Institute to ensure that any climate changes, any effects, and that will mean that the barley breeding will reflect that if there's any opportunities in that. The barley, of course, is a cereal grows so far north in this part of Scotland, so that's why it is our raw material. We used to import a lot more into the country, but there's good relationships with the maltsters and through to the farmers now, and that is an important part of the mechanism, and certainly in any stuff that's been spoken about locally, we are aware of that. We at Glenlivet, we go to the Murray and Banff Farmers Group to supply barley for us, because it's important that that barley is there for us, so we have to have closer relationships through the chain, and it's very much part of that sustainability.
We have a lighter question now. Let's not get so serious. Bernard Gutman says, great panel. What's in their glasses? And we'll start with Andy. What's in your glass?
I've got a little 3 Ships 15-year-old Pinotage cask finish blend. So that's what I'm enjoying at the moment.
Alan?
Well, I better tell the truth. I'm drinking a Nubble 10-year-old tonight because it's one of the whiskies that's available in the local cost cutter.
Okay.
When I go for my emergency supply,
I'm sorry, Alan, you broke up there.
I know that everybody would know by the colour it wasn't the 12-year-old or the 18-year-old, which is my usually pouring with the Glenlivet. But yeah, it's a double out of 10.
Okay, could you please repeat all that, because you were breaking up in the middle of that, and I was trying to get your attention, and I couldn't. But if you could repeat that, you broke up.
All right, it's a double hour 10-year-old tonight. It's available locally in the cost cutter, so I bought a bottle of it this week as part of my emergency supplies. When things come back to normal, I'll probably stocking up on some 12 and 18-year-old Glenlivet. But a very nice dram, double hour 10-year-old.
Matt.
Yeah, I've got a dram of our Cask-Exchange program here, which is our program where we take whiskey barrels and lend them out to breweries or wineries or other distilleries and get them back. This is with our Black Raven release. The trouble is that while it's very late for many of you over in Europe, it is still the afternoon here for me, and I still have a lot of work to do. So the likelihood of me continuing that work continues to decrease as this afternoon goes on. So, but that's okay. That's what this business is designed to do. So that's fine.
Bernard, before I go to you, I want to go back to Alan for a second, because we have a question from Graham Cruikshank. He knows that you have a soft spot for Aberlour. Do you prefer the Glenlivet Nadura Oloroso or Aberlour Abuna?
Well, he knows that answer better than anybody. Ask Graham what his favourite child is. I like to show the compliments off of them. Of course, the Abuna very heavily sherried, but the Nadura very much the natural. And we have done the Nadura in the 3 ranges now, but the American Oak, which was the original Nadura, is very good, but it shows off that Glenlivet character so well. So, been involved in both of them, so I have a soft spot for both
Bernard,
of them.
I am really hoping that you have some of this Seaweed IPA that you guys did with Dick Max.
Well, unlike Alan, I'm actually here in the office purely for Wi-Fi. My house is really just around the block, but I don't know if you can see back there, but I got a selection of all sorts of bottles and bits and bobs I've been trying. But yes, what I've got at the moment, we've got a collaboration underway with Dick Max, who I think you know, down in Dingle. So it's a Seaweed IPA cask with Writer's Tears, and we're hoping to bottle in a couple of weeks' time. Yeah, love it.
What is a Seaweed IPA? I've never tried one of those before.
So in their IPA, in their mash, they've used locally harvested seaweed, and they produced a beautiful IPA. It was a one-timer, and I was lucky enough to taste it. Absolutely beautiful. It was in their, what they call their Togue Bogay casks down in Dick Max, and we were lucky enough to get the casks when finished. And it's just been a collaboration, an experiment. This one worked.
Sounds good. Adam, before we get to you, Law School Drunk has noticed has good eyesight and wants him to pass you wants you to pass him some of the black art behind you on the shelf there.
The technology is good we've got tonight, but I don't know if it's that good. I'll be able to pass this down the screen. I'll try pouring it over the keyboard later on and see what happens. But
what's in your
well, actually, as I look behind me there, there's a good selection of stuff, and it's quite tempting. There's some old legacy bottles behind me there, but I've actually got a wee dram here. It's quite a special wee dram. I think it's a 1992 Bruichladdich, and it's from a bourbon cask. And actually, it was a bottle from we recently lost Duncan McGilvery. He passed away quite recently, so. For his funeral, like any kind of good Scottish funeral, particularly in Islay, there's plenty of whiskey floating about. So I pulled a few samples out of a lovely cask that I'm pretty sure Duncan would have approved of, and there's a couple of bottles extra. One of them I'll send up to Duncan. I don't know if anyone has during this kind of shutdown has had time to go on the BBC Scotland website and look through some of the BBC Alba BBC Alba kind of archive. There's a great documentary on Duncan and some of his pals who were heavily involved in resurrecting an old puffer, an old steam puffer that used to kind of travel around the coast. And so I'm going to send a wee bottle up to John and Lindsay Dunlop, and they can, because that puffer should be getting ready to go in the water soon, so they can share a wee dram of this. So we drank this at Duncans Funeral, and it's a lovely thing. So that's what I'm drinking tonight, is a wee thing. So to Duncan.
Yeah, absolutely. Duncan was one of the legends and a very good man. And
absolutely.
Natasha McGill, who will be joining us on an upcoming webcast, says, I think I'd cope quite fine being stuck on Islay for lockdown. Yeah, I could live with that. I could live with that usually. And just for the record, I'm actually, just to be completely neutral here and not play any favorites, I'm drinking a bourbon, the Elmer T. Lee bourbon from Buffalo Trace.
You don't need to be neutral, Mark. You can pick something.
Pardon?
I'm just teasing.
I didn't hear what you said, but
no, you don't need to be neutral. You can pick one of the five of us. I'm sure you can.
Well, let's have fun here, because we had several questions along this line. This one's from Aaron Krause. Do Matt and Adam plan to exchange casks for some bottlings, since Westland and Bruichladdich are co-owned? Have you guys talked about it?
We have. Yeah. We have. I think we had a few conversations in France. I'm trying to think when that was, actually, a while ago. But
a couple of years ago, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're up for everything, aren't we? But we'll give it a go.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's no, one of the nice things about, where we are now with Remy Cointreau is there's no pressure to try to consolidate supply lines. It's just because we're sister distilleries doesn't mean we need to start sharing everything to kind of streamline. We're both distilleries that are obviously really focused on trying to make something evocative of our place. And, so to do something like this would just be a really fun project. There's no pressure to put it together, but yeah, definitely we've had some fun conversations in the past.
I'm quite keen to get hold of some of this Gariana oak, but yeah, maybe one day.
Question somebody else asked earlier in the chat room was if you guys would do something like, say, a Port Charlotte rather, or an Octomore in Gary Oak. That would be interesting.
That'd be quite something. Yeah.
It definitely would. Yeah.
I think that's it. I think a lot of the whiskies we make, it's about the provenance. It's about the story of where it comes from, and it's just an extension of that kind of story. If we were to do this kind of thing, whether it's a cask from Hannett or whether it's a cask from Seattle, it could be really interesting. So yeah.
We had a question here for Alan from David Owen. Why did Glenlivet change the makeup of the 18? No more European oak and only 40%. It was good as it was. Why do you guys? Why do you make changes, or how it is? Let's go more generic here. What goes into the process of changing an existing expression when you have to change the recipe around?
I think the 18 is basically to the same recipe. I think what in the new packaging has probably told more of the story of what was in the product. How when I was over in the States last year, I had to explain that the double matured 12-year-old was the way it was always made. It was just that we had said that on the label. The 18 still got that very much style with that lovely fruity, the intensity of fruit going through. So it is really. It's really the same style of whiskey. It's just probably we've said more in the bottle about how the different casks is in it. There is a touch of European oak in it because there's the touches and the complexities of the spice, but it's very much still that well-matured 18-year-old, that fruity floral, that intensity of fruit.
Graham Fraser brings in another question for us. I've been impressed by the local barley initiatives at both Bruichladdich and Waterford. How are those initiatives developing? And of course, Mark Rainier from Waterford is not with us right now. But Matt, tell us what you can also talk to this because of what you guys have been doing with the folks at Washington State up in the Skagit Valley in terms of developing local barley strains. And Alan, I know you've done some stuff, at least a little bit, with local barley within the Chivas Brothers range. Give us some ideas of what can be done to improve local barley usage instead of using as what Andy told us, he's stuck with what the maltsters can get to him.
Oh man, Mark, that's a big question, a really important question. It's something that we're planning on answering actually in a release that we have planned for this year. We haven't officially announced it, but here I am talking about it. That kind of dives into the answer to some of those questions. The first thing is to think about barley within a system. It's kind of what I was talking about before with this idea that it's linked to agriculture. 80% of our barley comes from Washington State, where we are here. But it's one of 80 different crops that is grown in Washington State. And so it's part of an agricultural system. So the first thing to do is actually to value it as a crop, which means getting outside of the commodity system where it's about diminishing value. It's about making things as cheap and as efficient as possible. And a lot of the work that we've done, working especially with some of our partners like Skagit Valley Malting and Mainstem Malting, both in Washington State, has been about finding varieties of barley that can operate outside of the commodity system, because the commodity malting system is not designed for local barley varietals or new barley varietals or purple barley varietals and stuff like that, which we've kind of been experimenting with. So you need to have partners in that system, not just the farmers who are able to grow these things, who can value the barley, but maltsters who are willing to adapt. And that's quite a big challenge. It's much easier to say that you're going to use a local barley varietal or the new barley varietal that's not a commodity varietal than it is to actually do it in practice, because somebody needs to malt it, somebody needs to grow it, and then you need to distill it, and all of that stuff is going to be different. So you need to have a completely different mindset to approach it. And for us, I mean, that kind of, these barley varietals now make up 40% of the whiskey that we're laying down. So it's a huge initiative for us at Westland.
On that note, Ben Marnick asks a tech question for you, Matt. The yield now per ton of barley, is it nearer the industry standard of 410 liters of alcohol, or is that still not a factor? I remember hearing your colleagues at Washington State talking about actually getting even more from this local barley than in terms of yield.
Yeah, so one of the things that we look at first and foremost is yield is important, but it is not important at the expense of flavor, right? And at the expense, increasingly now, also at the expense of sustainability. But what we have been told, or what has really been a proposition recently, I think has been a bit of a false choice. This idea that you can only have yield and only have flavor. I don't think that that's true, actually. You need to be able to focus on having these three kind of three coexisting goals. Yields for the farmer and in the plants, because if it doesn't work for the farmer in a field, they're not going to make any money growing it. It needs to taste great, and it also needs to be more sustainably grown. So, one of the things that we have found is when you get it down to like micro-targeting varietals for provenance. So a great example is this varietal that we've used called NZ151. It's so new that it doesn't actually have a name yet. That did not work in terms of yield in the commodity grain system in North America, but when it was grown just north of where we are here in Seattle, it actually yielded 4 tons per acre, which is bigger than the expected yield in Washington State would be 3 tons per acre. So, but in order to do that, you have to kind of break the system, right? It's not designed, the commodity grain system is designed to be about sameness and uniformity. So to go outside of that, you're kind of on your own. That's the main challenge. But I definitely think that there is a ton of potential if we're searching for the right thing, searching for yield and flavor at the same time, and if we can adapt ourselves to those grains rather than just expecting the grain to do all the work for us.
Anyone else want to throw in on local barley?
I know
Well,
sorry.
Go ahead, Bernard.
I'm here in Carlow, which is sort of the central barley growing area. The Teagasc, which is the farm research body here in Ireland, is doing a lot of work on different varietals on exactly what was just being spoken about, looking at varietals that I suppose have been seen maybe not as commercially viable, but deliver on flavor and taste. And working and experimenting with farmers growing these. I know from our time at the distillery when we were in Royal Oak, we were willing to pay an extra buck. We were willing to pay an extra euro to the farmer for the right crop, the right taste. And I think it's down to the distiller, the whiskey companies, to push this agenda. Pay the farmer more. I don't believe, well, I know here in Ireland the farmer does not get a fair cut. We have a situation here in Ireland where we've only got 2 malting companies. It's a virtual monopoly. One company is a major European firm, and you have them in UK and Western Europe. And this is a problem. We need more competition here, and I believe that the distillers are willing to pay more to the farmer, to see that money go to the farmer. It's not at the moment. We have it is a problem having a virtual monopoly here.
Let's move on to another question. Now we have one for Andy now, actually 2. One from That's Dram Good. Will we see any more of 3 ships and Bains in Europe, particularly Ireland, anytime soon? Also, I promised to heckle him, so heckle, heckle, heckle. Okay. And also from Tyrone Cookie in Canada. Andy, do you plan to release any more Pinotage finished whiskies to North America? So tell us what you're working on in terms of when you can start shipping again. How's the rest of the world going to get? What are we going to see from you guys down there?
Well, the last few years we've done a lot of work in Europe with Bain. So, I would love to see that work continue. A lot of interest from countries like Ireland. At the moment, it's predominantly into UK, it's into Germany, which is our biggest market outside of South Africa, and then now into the Eastern European countries, which is doing quite well. So we are slowly spreading the footprint. 3 ships slightly different in that, Europe has this 700 ml bottle sizing, which we are 750 in South Africa. So we would need to either, go away from our 3 ships bottle to a more generic 700 ml, or have a new mold made, which is obviously quite expensive. In terms of coming, back to North America with something like Pinotage Cask, the Pinotage Cask was the second in the Masters Collection. So the Masters Collection is a yearly release of something which is new, limited, and it was never meant to be something which would be done on a continuous basis. But the Pinotage Cask, to me, brings a lot to the whiskey. So I wouldn't mind doing a second release of that in a few years. And obviously, it was well received in North America. And so was I when I was there at a couple of the festivals. So, it's got a soft spot. I'd love to be honest, I'd love to see my whiskies everywhere, Mark. If that's, if it would ever be possible. But, we're a really, if you think of Distell as a company, we're a very, very small part of that business. So, it's my passion. It's what I've lived for, and I keep knocking on the doors, but there's other things which, rightly so, get priority over the whiskey business.
Thank you, Andy. We have a question for Alan from Trevor Godino. He wants to hear more about the Glenlivet Spectra. And
all right,
this is your new mystery malt for this year, or mystery 3 malts as it is.
It's a mystery 3 malts, yes. I have it sitting on the shelf there. I was doing tastings in it yesterday and earlier today because we are launching it in the UK. It's a continuation of our secret range where we don't give you the tasting notes, we don't tell you the cask types, but we use sort of, you scan the label in the back, the QR scan, and you get maybe subtle hints on what's in, and you have to use your tasting skills, and you'll get a score back on that. So it's part of that range. We've always found it great fun because it really allows it rather than guide the consumer on the flavours, it's allowing them to look into the flavours. So that's the Spectra malt out, and I'm doing the UK again by the power of the internet tomorrow. So again, we'll be speaking to folk about that tomorrow.
And we mentioned it on the show this week, and I know it's coming to the U.S. later this year. So the Alpha was last year's, right?
We sent the Enigma to America last year, Cypher, the Code, and then Alpha.
Yeah, I think the Alpha was last year's because I've got it and I never actually found out what was in it. What was in the Alpha?
The Alpha is the first one. It was a very limited.
The Cypher was
one, and it was the Cypher. The Alpha was first after Scotch. It was new barrels taken into the Scotch whisky industry. They were used for something else, and then Glenlivet was put into it. And it was fairly unique at the time. It was back in the Seagram days, and it was pink casks, as we called them, because they were new, and we'd never seen new casks before. So they were used for something else first, and then they decided to put. And that was the Alpha. The Enigma, and I think it's the Code were the Rye. It was we swapped casks with Don Livermore, and you've seen the example. You see the Canadian version in Speyside casks, and that was the Canadian Rye influence back into the Speyside.
This brings up an interesting question that I'm trying. I can spend about 5 minutes here scrolling back through this, but one of the questions that was asked earlier was, how do you balance production between the main core range bottlings and these special one-offs like the Spectra releases, like the ones that you guys all do at various times? How do you balance producing the whiskey that you need for your core ranges versus setting aside the stuff that you need for the specials?
To me, Mark, you get a production plan from the chief blender. It's reviewed up continuously in the company because, of course, the big output. You get the plan, used to be in a piece of paper, and then you tear it up the next day because you don't know what's coming around the corner. I know that sounds flippant. It's crystal ball. I know that's the old story, but really, we take trends and we take things and we lay for the future. So we're investing for the future. As I always say, we're investing. The last 50-year-old, we've laid down the 50-year-old for 50 years' time. But things will change. We never saw this pandemic coming, so that will distort trade. But it'll give opportunities. Things will be left in the sense that they will not be required for a certain product, so they're left for further on down the line, and that's how how things evolve in that sort of sense. So we maintain the core range, but we have lots of things over the years that we lay down for future new product development, etc., that come to fruition along the line.
Adam, Bruichladdich known for all these special editions that you guys come out with. How do you balance things out?
Well, much the same as Alan's saying. You know, it's so hard to predict what's going to happen in the future that we make a guess, we try, and we lay stocks down. But what we tend to do is we come in the morning, we throw a dice. Whichever way it lands, that's tends to be the way we go. But I mean, things change all the time. I mean, for our production kind of scheduling, the way we think about making whiskey just now, we'll make Bruichladdich, put Charlotte and Octomore, but then we'll split that with Islay grown, with bare barley, with organic grown, with single farms from across the place. So we end up, with rye and all these kind of things, we end up with kind of 16, 17 different spirit types throughout the year. And when you break them down, they're relatively small. So we start off with all these kind of individual parcels. They'll all be destined for something at one point, but things change, things move, things evolve, and it gives us a lot of freedom. Like you said, we are known for being creative. We are known for kind of being experimental, and in a way, that's ourselves as a company. Still after 20 years, still finding our feet, if you like. We're kind of when the Jim and Mark and these guys came into the distillery back in 2001, they got the place up and running. It was a blank canvas, and 20 years, the whiskey they were laying down then to today, it's really 20 years isn't a long time, so we're still developing, we're still changing, so we still give ourselves options. We don't really know what the future is going to be. We may well find that this year we'd aim to produce 1 million litres, whether we will or not, who knows, but we may find in 10, 15 years time that wasn't enough. It's what happened in the past, and we look back at 2001 production or 2002. We made what we could, with a company being independent at the time, very small, couldn't afford to do all the things we can now. We never laid down enough stock. So I remember Jim talking about filling it at kind of still strength, 69%, and that was so that we could really lay down stock for 50, 60 years, to really kind of push things and see, we've got very, very little stock left in the one, if at all. Because we had to sell it to survive, So, as I say, it is like you say, the crystal ball thing, Alan, is it pretty much is that. Who knows what's going to happen? This pandemic changes things. Things change all the time, and our production schedule. I think by December last year, we're talking about 2019 production schedule. By December, we were on our 13th revision of that because you look at maybe an issue with a farmer producing organic, or you look at a technical problem up at Bears Maltings and Inverness, which means they can't supply what we thought. So things change all the time. I hope that's a vague enough answer to the question. That I've dodged it enough, but.
Bernard, how do you guys come up with new expressions? Because you have a limited supply of casks, and
Absolutely.
you come up with all sorts of fun stuff like Marsala finishes and things like that.
Yeah, just what Adam was saying there. We're never going to get it right. We're not going to get credited if we do get it right. But it is a bit of a hit and hope. But core for us would be, and this is roughly, core for us is say 80% roughly, 20% NPD, and this is what really, while commercially core is key, NPD is what gets me out of bed, and I love it. And it's continuous. We're out there, we're exploring. We heard a lot about barley and terroir, equally, if not more so. The cask is so important. So I spend a lot of my time traveling the globe. Just before the pandemic lockdown, I was lucky to be in Canada and came across some amazing casks over there that we're trying to get shipped and brought over. It's it's a full-time job, new product development, and a lot of it works. The bits that don't work, you don't get to hear about, but I get to taste here and have a bit of fun with. But really, experimenting on the cask side is key to us, and there's so much work for the Irish whiskey industry. I would say we look in envy across at Islay and the boys in Speyside to see what you've done, and we're on catch up, and watch out, boys, we're coming.
And we have a quick question along these same lines for Matt from Scotchology. How do we beg you to finish more Westland in port barrels like cask 3786? I'm guessing that was a pretty good one.
Yeah, I'd like to think that most of them are pretty good, but I am biased to be sure. So, the main thing for us is we've got more of that stuff. We've got a variety of casks that we fill into, red wine, white wine, various sweet wines, kind of all the greatest hits like you'd see from the global kind of wine industry around the world. But increasingly as we go along, the more important thing for us is what can we source from this region? What can we source from the Pacific Northwest? Our whole identity is wrapped up in that concept. The beauty of that is that the Pacific Northwest is a super diverse place when it comes to beverage alcohol production. So, we've got a lot of wine being produced here, dry wine, sweet wines. We've got a lot of beer. So the options are there, even if we can't find a port cask, and we've got some port casks from Portugal, but we can also find something that does something similar that is produced by a winery locally. And it has nothing to do with quality, of course. It just kind of becomes, what is our mission? You've only got so many casks that you're able to fill. And for us, we're just trying to stay as focused as we can on sourcing that stuff locally. But to answer your question, you don't need to beg. we're filling all sorts of fun stuff. It's just a matter of releasing it. So we got some cool things up our sleeves.
We have a question for Andy from Law School Drunk. When is 3 ships coming to New York City? Yeah, I want to know this one too. When do we get 3 ships?
Yeah, we've got a little project running, hoping to get some to the States. I don't know exactly where, Mark, but yeah, it's again back to what I was saying. 99% of our whiskey is of our South African whiskey is sold within South Africa. Our export market is around 1% of our business. So, as much as I would like to see more of it at this stage, the focus for our marketing and our business is still the South African market. We've got about 20% share of the whiskey which is sold in South Africa. So there's still a lot of room for us to gain ground here, and that is, I think, at this stage the focus for the team here.
We have a question now from Greg Unrau for Adam. Why did Bruichladdich choose to make Octomore, the 10 series, so much lower on the peat than the previous Octomore series? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear it from you.
Yeah, well, I think we didn't choose it. That's the answer. The thing about Octomore is an idea of a whiskey. The kind of the concept came about from Jim just really wanting to push the phenol level just to see what would happen, because go back a few years, back to 2002 was the first year Octomore was distilled. So very, very early days in the distillery's kind of resurrection. And we were taking a supply of malt, as we still do, from Baird's Maltings, and they were talking about the technique they use to create heavily peated malt. And obviously what they do, they peat it, and then they analyze it for a phenol content, its ppm, and then based on the requirements of the distillers, they'll cut it with unpeated to reach a specific ppm. And Jim was saying, well, just give us some of the uncut stuff then. We want to make the the really heavily peated stuff. And the problem with it was the maltsters were saying was you can't guarantee consistency. What happens one day won't happen the next, so we can't give you a steady supply at a specific ppm. And it didn't matter to us. It still doesn't matter to us. So really, Octomore was about what is the ppm. At the time, each kind of addition, each batch is different by its nature. So the kind of record holder, if you like, at the moment is an Octomore. It was 309 ppm. It was an Islay grown. Actually, it was with barley grown on Octomore farm on the island, and it was sent up to Inverness, malted, brought back, and the analysis was 309 ppm. So 309.1. The 0.1 is very important in that one. But it came back at that ppm, and each year we see a fluctuation in what that ppm is. And the 10th edition we just released back in October, there it was just a bit lower. And it was interesting because the conversation, I remember, with Octomore, there isn't really another whiskey like it where that variation in its kind of fundamental component, if you like, it's not the same all the time. It was always about pushing the boundaries. It was about getting peatier and peatier each time, and that was the conversation we had with the maltsters in the early days. Was okay. Well, last year it was 169. Let's try and get it above that. Let's push it, and naturally we find that there's only so far you can go. And whether it's the peat, whether it's the weather conditions up at the maltings, whatever it is, naturally it fluctuates. And it was quite interesting to release that 10th edition and see that ppm be lower. But I mean, for us, the conversation is moved away. I mean, this is an evolution of a new whiskey. It's not old. We don't have old stocks. It's a limited kind of product to make. And what we've done with Octomore is just release it kind of vintage by vintage, if you like, batch by batch, and invited everyone to taste it along with us as we are learning about the spirit and what we're doing. So naturally, there will be a lower ppm.
Okay, we have a question that's going to spark some controversy here, and it's directed at Matt. It comes from Law School Drunk. With all due respect, Matt, when is the price going to come down on Westland's bottlings? Remy can absorb it, reach a wider market. I'm going to rephrase the question a little bit here because it's not just fair to pick on Westland. How do you guys decide the pricing? And I know it's in some of your cases, you're not the ones making the call on this one. But how are the recommended retail prices for whiskeys decided? But I'm going to let Matt take, since Law School Drunk called Matt out on this one. I want to give you a chance to respond first, Matt.
So let me try to deftly sidestep this trap that has been laid before me. And I think one of the things that people don't know or understand is economies of scale in this business. We're here and we're located in one of the most expensive cities in North America, in Seattle. It's a nice place. You get a lot for that money, but there's that. But on top of that, there's the economies of scale when you're producing something at smaller volumes like we are. We're only filling 1,500 casks a year. Everything is much less efficient. The other big thing to think about, though, as far as our approach specifically, is that we're using a lot of stuff that is much more expensive, much more flavorful. For example, in our core range whiskeys, like our American Oak, which is our standard bottling, that's using 4 different types of roasted malts. Now, these roasted malts are vastly more expensive, actually, than a base pale commodity malt, double or triple the price of those malts. And that's a big part of it. And on top of that, you've also got you've got the lowered yield impact that comes with those roasted malts. It's creating these flavors at the expense of yield. So it's kind of a double impact. So that's one of the things to keep in mind. The thing that I always point to is, what would you pay for a bottle of really nice wine? And can you work that math backwards on translating that to a bottle of whiskey? Would you pay $30 for a great bottle of wine? You're like, absolutely, I would pay $30 for a great bottle of wine. And if you kind of do an alcohol for alcohol comparison, that's kind of where Westland lines up. So, it's something that a lot of people don't get to see. And especially as we march forward into the future, we're going to have some more stuff that'll be more expensive. But you also have stuff that's, when you start to get into this realm of trying to pay a farmer's a living wage, and trying to pay them for something beyond commodity value, or anything that's not a commodity, you are going to pay more money for it. So it's really remarkable how expensive those decisions can get. Obviously, we're not trying to price people out of Westland, but we also know what it costs to make it too.
Alan, the bigger side, I know you've got guys in the big city, far away from Speyside, that make the calls on pricing, and then everybody in the regional markets decides this. But you've got that economy of scale because you've got one of the biggest distilleries in Scotland.
Yeah. I also go back to the forecasting. I heard my colleagues saying we didn't make enough a few years ago. We increased capacity. We've invested in that. Every time we make more whiskey, we need more cereal. Yes, more barley at Glenlivet. We need more casks to mature it in. And then we're going to lock it away for a long time, a lot longer. Investment of stock, etc. Also, in real terms, I often say to folk, the whiskies are quite priced. The standard rate, the ranges in that are as priced as well as they were when I started in the industry. In fact, when I started, some of it was very expensive. I know in terms there is, in our company, we have whiskies from that end to that end in the pricing range. As I say, I'm drinking an Islay 10-year-old. I saw somebody put up they could buy it for so many dollars. It tastes good. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that qualities, etc. But tomorrow night, well, I will be drinking maybe an 18-year-old Glenlivet, which is a bit more expensive. But yes, it's we were. Over the years, it's become larger and larger. It was a blended whiskey market. It allowed us a lot of flexibility. Single malts are very specific product. You heard the Bruichladdich about stocks. We speak about stocks. We have large stocks. We we increased capacity quite a few years ago and then expanded to meet this demand. The crystal ball saying that we will need more single malt. So there's a lot of investment in that. And I always use the example a few years ago. I was phoned up and says, "What were you guys doing 12 years ago? The cost of the whiskey coming through to the accountants has just rocketed in this particular year." And it was simply we weren't short of, the farmers couldn't grow enough barley that year, so the price went up. So that is reflected in the inventory. So all of a sudden they saw a spike. So we always say that you should put your price up when the barley price goes up. Should you take it down when it comes down? You have to watch. I think it's very important. I think the industry's done a lot in the sense to add value to the whiskies, which reflect correctly the costs in it. It can be a race to the bottom as well, so we don't want to be in that sort of situations again.
Anyone else want to tackle this one?
I think, sorry, but I was going to say that the value, I think, is the big thing. That, you know, this is something that, you know, speaking at Bruichladdich, there's about 100 people involved in producing this whiskey, and you know, it's not something that is produced cheaply. It's something that we put a lot into. It represents who we are. It represents where we come from, and there's a whole conversation, the whole traceability through it. You know, there's a huge amount goes into producing something that is an absolutely amazing product. You think back to the farmer, you think to the maltster, you think to the cooper. You know, you think to all these things. That there's so much that goes into making whiskey that it's more than just the price on the shelf. You know, if you're looking for something that's priced on the shelf, then maybe the single malt whiskey that we're all making here isn't the thing. You know, it's naturally going to be expensive, but it's something you're going to sit and you're going to enjoy, you know, and take your time over, and the value in there, I think, is very, very good.
I was going to say, knowing the guys around the table know their brands, their core brands, there's great value out there. But I do have a sort of beef with, you know, I do see some gouging out there. There in the last number of years, expressions, brands coming to market, which is not giving the consumer value. And it's always been a thing we've made a point of here, is giving the consumer extra bang for his buck. So, and I take, you know, okay, or the Irishman range we have here, the Irishman Founders Reserve. It's a single pot, single malt blend, you know, wonderful blend, but, you know, two amazing ingredients, pot and malt, and yet it's on the shelf for $35. Same with our Riders Cheers copper pot, you know, $40. Go to our 17-year-old, the Irishman 17-year-old sherry, single cask-strength, just above 100 euros here in the US, and there's maybe 100. Actually, it's not in the US, but say just over $100 here. So you know, giving more, putting more into the bottle for them, always delivering a little bit more. That's what we try to do. And, you know, I think everybody around the table here is doing the same, but there are people out there who, you know, are yanking up the price for, you know, for what? The pricing model very much defined by the, you know, the three-tier system you have in the US, for example. You know, everything's got to work.
Hold on, I interrupted you there, and I'm sorry. I talked over the top of you, and we lost what you were saying before. Would you please repeat what you were just saying there for a second?
Yeah, Mark, sorry. I was just saying, you know, in the US, for example, the three-tier system defines ultimately what the price is on the shelf, but we start that ball rolling. So it's, you know, our cost of goods plus our margin. But you know, I think the vast majority of distillers and whiskey companies, you know, really keep a steady hand on the tiller there. But you have there has definitely in the last 2 and 3 years been a bit of gouging going on by a number of companies.
Andy, I'm betting that we probably have nothing to complain about when it comes to what you guys pay for whiskey down in South Africa, given the tax situation down there. Give us some comparisons from your point of view.
Well, you know, listening to everybody, it's, you know, we've all got our unique situations. You if I think about South Africa, the question I'm asked the most here is why are South African whiskies, why aren't they cheaper? Why are they so expensive? Now, to give you an idea, the Scottish whiskies on our shelves are probably half the price of what they are in Scotland. Making whiskey in South Africa is it's challenging. Our currency is probably at the weakest it's been against the dollar and the pound in as long as I can remember. You're at the moment around about $18.5, $19 to a rand and 24 rand to a pound. Now, all of our casks are imported in dollars. All of our barley is imported in pounds. We live in a country with an inflation rate of, outside of the situation now, but normally running about 7 to 10%. Utility prices going up, 25 to 35% per year. And, people are saying, but then, why aren't your whiskies cheaper? There are so many, influences, so much input costs, which drive the price of whiskey. Yes, marketing and the accountants and everybody else plays their role, of which I've got nothing to do with. But I think we do a pretty good job with all those challenges to be able to put our whiskey onto the shelves at the price it is. Even our products in the UK and Europe, Baines, for example, I think is around about the 25 to 30 euro mark, which, as Matt rightly said, if you look at a good bottle of wine, there's not much difference.
And I want to just close on that with the comment that Bert Doyle gave us. Without the margins, we have no whiskey industry. If there's no profits, there's no distilleries and there's no whiskey at all for any of us. So we got to accept some of this somehow, I would think. Guys, I'm going to close it off there because we have gone almost an hour and a half, believe it or not. It doesn't seem like it, but we have. I want to thank all of our guests, Andy Watts from Distell, Alan Winchester from the Glenlivet, Adam Hannett from Bruichladdich, Bernard Walsh of the Walsh Whiskey Company, Writer's Tears and the Irishman, and Matt Hofmann from Westland. Guys, I hope you have had fun doing this, and thank you. We'll help try to get you all back again real soon. Let me just close with a bit of just a quick comment. About 3 weeks ago on the show, on our Thursday show that day, I mentioned a longtime listener of WhiskyCast, Mike Walsh, and he is being treated in Boston, in a hospital in the Boston area for COVID-19, and was on a ventilator at that time 3 weeks ago. I just wanted to give you a quick update. As of today, the doctors thought he was good enough to try to start weaning him off the ventilator. His condition had gotten bad to the point where over the weekend, they had called his wife in to be with him in the hospital because they thought he wasn't going to make it. And then he started coming back, and they thought they might be able to take him off the ventilator. They are still trying to, and it looks like hopefully there might be some very good news on that front. We keep hoping for you, Mike, and we keep praying for you. And for everybody out there fighting this battle, whether you're a patient, a caregiver, the family members of patients, first responders, healthcare workers, the folks trying to come up with vaccines, or the politicians trying to manage this whole situation, we are thinking of you. And for the rest of us, the best we can do is stay home and stay inside and stay out of the way and do what we can to help fight this virus. Don't forget to join us on Friday for our happy hour webcast. We have a fun panel lined up right now. As I mentioned earlier, Dave Broom will be joining us. We will also be joined by Noah Rothbaum and David Wondrich, the cocktail and spirits authors who do the Life Behind Bars podcast for the Daily Beast. We'll also be joined by Joanne McInnes, the Whiskey Lassie from Canada. And we may even have another special guest or two. We'll have surprises for you along the way. That's coming up Friday, 5 p.m. New York time, 2200 London time, 2100 GMT elsewhere in the world. And until we meet again, I'm Mark Gillespie. Please drink responsibly, stay home, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you on Friday. Sláinte, guys.
Sláinte.
Cheers.
Good health, lads.